Hey everyone, Liz here from the Nail Hub, and I was just about to redo my nails and I stopped myself again and said this would make a very good YouTube video. So I wanted to actually go over everything about layers today because I do think that's one of the confusing parts that people are having a hard time with when I talk about overlays or I talk about extensions or I talk about how to backfill things. And I shortened my nails down, and before I went to go take the color off, I noticed that I'm actually able to see layers very clearly on these nails. I'm going to zoom in here so you guys can see. I'm going to get rid of my little fuzz or whatever that is. So what's interesting is you can clearly see different colors and different layers that are part of my nail here. And I wanted to start by explaining. You can kind of see 4 different layers here on this one. So I'm going to draw this out for you from the tip and also talk about why the layering is important and also the general shape of this. The other one I wanted to show you is this guy, which I don't have the same kind of layers on here because I use different product on both hands. But I also wanted to kind of talk about the overall shape of the layering and really what we need to look for. And this is going to kind of revisit some of the topics I talked about in my C-curve and apex video, but also kind of explain some of the disadvantages of some of the ways that you can apply product on your nail. Like this one is a little bit different as well, and discuss kind of this layering system. So let me just zoom out just a little bit and find my center here on camera. So I've got some different colored pencils here, or pens here. And first off, what I wanted to talk about is when we are going to be backfilling nails, which again, I prefer backfilling because if we're constantly removing everything via soak off, the amount of just chance that you're going to damage your nails goes up drastically. And so when I've talked about in the past about creating this kind of overlay system, and here's like my nail from the side. Here's my finger. Well, it's a terrible drawing. Okay, so here is basically like here's like my finger, blah, 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 with my knuckle here and my skin. Here's my nail plate. Here's my skin underneath my nail. And then I can even draw like a little sidewall here just to kind of give that view. If we are constantly touching our nail, right, like we kind of like rough up our nail to be able to put gel on it, then we remove, and then we rough up again to start reapplying product. If you're doing that every single 2 weeks, right, your nail is only growing out about this much. So let me just show you, right? So 2 weeks of regrowth, you're going to have about this much space that's new nail. So this entire section of nail is getting touched multiple times until you end up shortening this bit off, right? So really it would take you, here's like 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks before you're getting a whole half of a new nail that's grown out again. So you can imagine how many times any given section of this nail is getting kind of, scraped and retouched and re-roughed up and, all of those different things and exposed to acetone and all of that stuff. And so this process is really how we start to feel our nails getting thin when it comes to gel products. With overlays, right, we're going to keep a layer on our nails and we're only going to be removing some of the structure and some of the color every time. And if you guys haven't seen, all of my overlay and backfill videos, definitely check that out because I do talk about that protective layer that we maintain on the nail. But I do think for some of you, it is confusing about what is the protective layer and how much of a protective layer that you need. So if we look at our nails again from this perspective, which I like to call down the barrel, but you can call it down the tip or whatever you want to call it. Essentially, like here's our actual natural nail, right? So we've got this natural nail material that's underneath everything. And I'll make it a little bit bolder just so we can see it on camera. So here's my natural nail. And let's use the blue pen as our clear or, pink builder, right? And this can be soak off, it can be hard gel, it can be whatever you want. And obviously I'm taking into consideration that there's some kind of base coat in this layer as well, right? We need something that creates adhesion and then we need something that's going to create our protective layer. Okay. So what we do then is we're going to create this protective layer And if we're just doing like thin gel polish application, and again, take these layers with a grain of salt, but I'm trying to make them about credit card thickness because that's essentially what we're looking for. I'm just trying to show you guys the colors of what you're essentially going to be doing, okay? So here's kind of like a rudimentary view of just what the layers look like without taking into consideration shape. And even if you're just doing very thin gel polish application and you're not going to be doing apex building or any of that stuff, and you're not worried about C-curves, you just want to be able to take off your gel polish color and have this protective layer, you essentially need to have about a credit card thickness layer of base plus clear or pink builder of some kind. And again, this can be soak off, it can be hard gel, it could be poly gel, it could be, dip if you guys are into the dip stuff. But essentially we need some kind of long lasting layer. And I like builder gels because when you're dealing with something that's going to be on the nail for weeks at a time, you don't want something that's going to break down. You don't want something that's going to yellow or get brittle or change in texture. You need something that's kind of meant for long-term wear. So that's why I usually recommend, some kind of high adhesion base coat or primer or bonder or whatever, followed by clear or pink builder gel. Okay, so then we've got this builder layer here, and we are going to put color on top of it. Okay, so let's just say this is our color layer. And again, this could be, when I talk about color, it could be one color, it could be nail color plus nail art, it could be whatever the layers are that you're going to be creating color with. This is going to go on top of that protective layer, okay? And then, last but not least, we're going to have a thin coating of top coat. Right? So here's our top coat, flat, matte, shiny, whatever you want. But there's our top coat layer. So in any given overlay, we're going to have our, and I'll put the colors here. So we're going to have our natural nail. We're going to have our, protective layers, right? Which is all of this. Because we need the base to create adhesion, and then we need some kind of builder gel. And these could maybe be the same product, depending on what you're using. But essentially, we need to be able to create adhesion, and we also need to be able to create a long-lasting overlay that's going to work with the nail, not change in texture, not break down over time, all of that. Then we have our color. And then last but not least, we have our top coat. Okay, so I think part of the confusion comes from, understanding what each one of these layers do, right? And so when we talk about base, it's all about creating adhesion. And that's why you could use a base, a bonder, anything like that, depending on the system you're using. There's always going to be some kind of layer that creates adhesion to the natural nail. Then we're going to use a different kind of product, or this could be an all-in-one, and we're going to put something that is meant for being on the nail long term. And that is usually what builder gels are for. Builder gels are formulated where they're not meant to be taken off very frequently. They're more resilient. They can be flexible or they can be rigid depending on what you're using, but they're meant to be on the nail long term. Whereas things like dip powder really aren't meant to be on the nail long term. Now you could be using dip powder with gel to create that overlay, but if you're using the actual glue products, glues are really not going to be as long lasting as, say, a gel. So it depends on what you're doing your dips with. Then with the color, obviously all the color layer is really going to be doing is creating pigmentation, right? We're going to be adding whatever color or art. There are some color gels that combine with these. There are some things that are base, builder, and color all in one. And I'll get into that in a second. And then last but not least, we have our top coat, which basically creates that impermeable coating so that all of this stuff underneath doesn't get stained, it doesn't get rubbed, it doesn't get, damaged. And it creates either a high shine finish or a matte finish, depending on what you're looking for. Okay. Now, when we go to backfill these nails, and let me go back to my actual nail because I want to show you kind of what this looks like side by side as a real comparison. Let me just adjust myself here. Let me see if I can get my camera to focus. Okay, there we go. Okay, so just like I was showing you, right, we have these layers here. And let me just get something to point with. Okay. So I have this white you see under here is this very, very thin layer of white is my natural nail. Then on top of that, I think I had a tip or I had clear gel first. That's why you can see this like very thin kind of extension layer here. So whether or not that's a tip, extension gel, whatever it is, you're going to have this kind of like thin clear layer that's just to extend the length before I shortened these down. Then you can see my builder gel layer, which is this pink layer. Okay, so that's kind of that like washed out baby pink color. And then you can see the red color I have on top. And you can't really see the top coat because it's very thin, but you can see those same layers that I was talking about here. Okay, so we have the natural nail, we have our I had clear extension gel, but essentially then I also had this pink layer here, and then I had color, and then I have top coat on top of it. So when I go to backfill this, essentially what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be shaving all of this off. I'm going to be taking all of the top coat and the color off, and I'm going to be maintaining most of this blue layer. So when I shave everything down, my goal is that I still have my natural nail protected, and I'm going to maintain most of this clear protective layer, and I'm only going to shave down to this clear protective layer. Now again, like I said earlier, this blue layer might actually be a base, builder, and color all in one. Like the kind of like, I'll show you an example. So like Jimmy Gel that's now in this new delicate peach color is an example of that. It's like a rubber based type of product. It creates adhesion, it's got color, and it's also got that builder gel that consistency. I still highly recommend, especially if you're not super experienced with backfilling or filing or e-filing to be able to do these overlays, I still highly recommend that you keep these layers clear, because you want to be able to see your natural nail while you're doing this, and you want to be able to see lifting very easily. And so I usually always keep this layer clear. And then if I want to put a pink builder over it, I will put a pink builder over it. But I like to be able to file down and see my nail plate completely through the clear gel. I like to be able to see any lifting, if you had any Pseudomonas infections or bruising or yellowing or any of that of your natural nail plate, you would be able to see that much easier through a clear product than you would be able to see it through a pink. And also, I do find that the pink builder gels, when you're backfilling them, especially if you're not going to be putting any color on top, it's more difficult to get them to match and to blend. And sometimes you end up with this kind of like hodgepodge of different layers, and you can kind of see where you were backfilling and all of that stuff. So I always recommend you stick with clear as that base layer. It just makes everything that much easier to see and to work with and to be able to experience as far as learning about what lifting looks like, all of those different things. And then you can put all of these different things on top of it. As far as recommendations for, because again, we would file down and then we would put a little bit more, right? So like you would file down to this, and then maybe you'd put this a little bit thicker just to get back to that layer that you had before, especially if you filed through it in some places. It gives you that buffer so you're not touching the natural nail every time. And then you could finish file this, or maybe if you're getting good at keeping the gel really nice and smooth, you'd go straight into color and top coat. Okay, so that's that whole process. And so instead of taking everything off, we're literally just going to be kind of like adjusting this, like I've shown you guys in my previous videos, where we're going to be filing everything down, readjusting either the shape or the thickness and the smoothness, and then we're going to go back and maybe add more product and then go into our colors and our top coats. Now, when it comes to what I was talking about on this hand, when it comes to the shape, we can also use this exercise as an opportunity, let me just move all of this stuff over, as an opportunity to perfect the nail shape and to also not only creating a protective layer, but we can also use it as a way to create strength on the natural nail and to create shape on the natural nail. So let me show you a couple of scenarios. I'll show you one from the side. And here's my lovely nail plate. It's funny because I can actually draw pretty well when I'm concentrating, but whenever I do these quick little videos, I always feel like I make the ugliest nails. So here's my natural nail plate. Maybe you have a nail that looks like this. So here's my finger. Here's the natural nail. Maybe your natural nail looks like this when it grows out. It's got this ski slope. And maybe also you've got a nail, and again, these are exaggerated because they're long. I mean, even if they were this length, right? Here's kind of what you could imagine you'd be dealing with. But even with those ski jump nails, even when they're really short, you can start to, feel that slope. And a lot of people are very self-conscious about that. I don't really see it to be something self-conscious about, but I can totally understand that people are like, oh, I wish I had nails that weren't like that. Everybody always wants what they don't have. Okay. And then the other issue is maybe your nail kind of curves down like this. And so you've got this kind of, they call them eggshell nails, or even if they're not that eggshell texture, they just kind of curve down. And maybe they kind of hook off the end of your finger. Now, obviously, again, shortening these is going to mitigate the actual exaggerated effect of these shapes. But as we're doing these layers, we can not only create the C curve and apex from, a down the barrel perspective, but again, we can also kind of use these layers. So remember, here's my natural nail plate. What I can do, again, shortening this, and if you wanted to shorten it, extend it, you could do that. But a lot of you have asked me about this. I'm going to exaggerate my apex a little bit with a nail like this. And essentially what I'm going to be doing is keeping it very thin here. And I'm going to use that builder layer, that overlay layer, to fill in this, okay? So if I just block that off for you, essentially you would have a nail that, and again, not this thick, but you can get the idea of what I'm doing, which is I'm going to fill in that part that makes it look like a ski slope nail with a bunch of clear product. And I'm going to be able to artificially make the nail look like what mine looks like. I'm going to be able to keep it very thin out here and fill all of this in so that if my nail does slant up, I'm actually going to be able to artificially make this look like it doesn't slant up so much. If you have just a plain Jane flat nail, you can still create a nice apex that really, makes this kind of have a nice shape to it. And I usually do that with my nails. Obviously, they look a little blunt right now because I did shorten them down, but you can see that I'm actually creating this apex shape. And it's personal preference. This does add a lot of strength to the nail because you're adding quite a bit of thickness here on the more, sensitive area of the nail plate where things are prone to breaking. So by creating this apex, I'm creating a lot of strength, but depending on how exaggerated you like to make it is completely personal preference. There's the structural part of it, and then there's the aesthetic part of it. And so it just depends on what you personally prefer. And then same thing with this one. I can basically do this, and I'm going to actually have a lot more thickness out here because I want to bring the end of this nail up. And then what I can do, once this is all filled in with product, depending on how long the nail is, you could shorten this completely down so it basically just looks like that. And again, you could make this more, curvy if you want to. But essentially, there's going to be a lot more thickness on the end of a nail that looks like this. And on a nail that looks like this, it's going to be very thin on the free edge. And in this situation, what you could do is you could, if you are an e-filer, you could take a bit and just carve out this whole area of the nail. And obviously I could shorten this all off. And so I can bring this up. And when you do that, it ends up looking kind of like my nail here. You would bring all of this up underneath. And so it ends up being thin on the edge, but the height of it is going to be pretty high on the tip. So you're bringing everything up. And it just depends on the anatomy that you were, dealt with. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of these different types of nails. Everybody has different nails. And that's part of what we can do is we can adjust our applications to make things look the way we want them to look. But again, there's nothing wrong with just doing thin layers and keeping it just natural. You don't have to get all crazy with the architecture, but it does add strength by doing this. If we look at it from this perspective, what we can also do is create this apex, regardless of how we're doing it here, this thickness that we're adding. When we look at it this way, we want these sides to stay pretty thin. Usually they need to be just a hair thinner than a credit card in order to keep the gel from snapping and breaking. Unless it's a very flexible gel, usually that's kind of a good golden rule. But if we add some height in the center of the nail, like this, with that builder layer. And again, you could do a little bit of this with each layer, you know, as you go, if you wanted to kind of use like even your top coat to do this like final tweak or whatever the case might be, depending on how much you need. And again, depending on how long the nail is, we're going to need more product on the nail for longer nails. But if we're just talking about like a natural nail, we can also add this height here in the center, just like I showed you like this, where the sides are going to be thin and I've got this height running down the center. What that does is it creates the illusion that the nail is more slim and slender and tight, and it makes your nail beds look more narrow when the product is kind of coming up towards you. And the other thing too, besides the aesthetic part of it, is it also creates that strength factor right down the center of your nail, where your nail is going to be less wiggly side to side. It's not going to flex up and down. Your product is going to last longer. The color on top is going to last longer. You're not going to have chipping and all of those different things that I've talked about. And again, all of this is kind of a review of what I've done in past videos, but I did want to kind of show you in real life what it looks like when you're looking at those layers on the nail, and also kind of re-explain some of this stuff, because I know that you really can't hear this enough, especially when we're talking about, you know, a lot of people are so used to just trying to figure out what gel is and what it does. And I think this is an important factor when you're understanding all the power that literally resides inside each one of these layers that you're applying. There's so much opportunity to perfect shapes, to create strength, to be able to protect that natural nail so that we're not constantly touching it over and over again. And if you're just learning with either an e-file or with hand filing and backfilling, having a little bit more of a buffer like I did here really helps, because if you accidentally overfile through your color, you're not going to be touching your natural nail. So give yourself a little bit of an extra buffer as you're learning, and it's going to make it a lot easier for you to be able to do that. But just to show you guys one last time, this I thought was just a really good thing to show you in real life, because it does allow you to see what those layers look like when you actually shorten the nail down. And if you're like me and you're constantly experimenting with different product, you're going to end up like me, where you've got different layers of things all happening on the same nail, and you don't have to take that product off every single time. I can just continue to shave things down. If I got sick of it, I could, you know, file all the way through this pink layer. I've got red, I could file through that down into this baby pink layer, and then I could, you know, just leave this clear layer here and start over again. And I always leave that cushion, that protection on my natural nail so that I'm not touching it over and over and over again. And I think this is just a good demonstration to show you what that looks like in real terms, and also explain it to you with some of those colored drawings to explain all the layers. So I hope this helps, and I wanted this to just be a useful exercise before I went and redid my nails. If you guys have any further questions about this topic, I'm happy to continue to go into any details you want to know. But I hope this helps you guys out. All right, see you guys next time. Bye.